Welcome back, everybody. This week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. As mentioned, our special guest is Dr. Rosalyn Berne, talking about the new book, When the Horses Whisper. Dr. Berne, welcome to the program. Pleasure to have you with us on the show today.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you, Rick.
It's an excellent book, and this is going to be a fascinating interview that we scheduled in the program today. And I want to sort of lay the groundwork. Let's go back to you as a youth, and you talk about that in the book, and you mentioned that as a child you knew that you were different from others. You could sort of sense things when other children couldn't. Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move into actual experiences.
This is a story that starts with my mother telling me that at about 2 years old, I was pointing to and describing beings that she couldn't see, and it actually was making her fairly nervous. But as it turns out, there were some people who were deceased that were still in our home, and I was having conversations with them. My mother was advised to read Edgar Cayce so she could better understand her daughter. I think that by the time I got to be a teenager, those senses were waning a little bit, but I still did have awarenesses, like when my grandparents both passed, I could sense it in my body that they were passing. Things like that helped me to realize that maybe I had some capabilities that not everyone would understand.
The book is called When the Horses Whisper. The website is very simple, whenthehorseswhisper.com. You can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get that information. If somebody were to read that, look at the title and go, I'm sure she's been around horses all of her life. That's how this developed. And it's interesting, you really weren't around horses all your life and never owned a horse.
No, I rode horses in summer camp when I was 11 and 12. And since then, many years later, I've done some trail rides on vacations. But no, I'm not a classical horse person. I've never owned horses. I think they're beautiful, but this came really quite unexpectedly to me.
Let's talk about, I think the first horse, in fact, you dedicate the book to Aladdin along with the other horses. Let's talk about Aladdin. That came at an early age, and that was really a very special experience for you.
It was. I was a city girl living in urban Philadelphia, and my parents sent me to a summer camp that had a riding program. Aladdin was one of the Arabian horses there. I got very emotionally attached to him. I felt that he was in some ways sort of a protector and a support to me. And I missed him very much after summer camp and had lots of daydreams and fantasies about Aladdin and wanting horses, as many young girls do with horses. But Aladdin, I think, helped me to sense some things about myself and give me a sense of safety that was otherwise wanting in my city life.
What's interesting is that final scene as you're getting ready to leave the camp and you're in tears and saying goodbye, and you sense that Aladdin felt that same sort of melancholy, but said to you, and you sensed that I will be with you forever. And I get the impression that Aladdin has been with you forever, including the day we're taping this.
It's interesting, and how do I explain that? Certainly, he's with me in my heart. He didn't come back in my memory until I started having this experience with horses. And then it was almost as if he had been with me, and this was an opening to reconnect with his spirit, almost as if he was encouraging me to discover what was possible in communicating with other horses.
Dr. Rosalyn Berne is our guest on the program. The book is When the Horses Whisper, and the website is very simple, whenthehorseswhisper.com. Available at our website, thisweekinamerica.us, all that information, and you can link on. Let's take this to Costa Rica and talk about your experience there, and that's when this really became something known to you that I'm actually understanding and communicating with these horses, and it's really transforming my life.
Yes. The first time was 3 years ago this week, actually, or last week. I was there actually to finish writing my first novel as a writing retreat. And after 3 or 4 days in the cabin, I felt a need to get outside, get fresh air, get some sunshine. So I went on a trail ride. During that ride, I rode a horse named Titan, who stumbled just slightly as we were crossing a river, and I fell off into the river. When I stood up, soaked head to toe, I was laughing hysterically, but Titan was forlorn. He was looking at me, really quite upset. And when I got back on, to ride back to the main barn, all the way back, maybe 20-minute ride, Titan was talking with me. He was apologizing and explaining that that had never happened before. He was afraid he was going to be in trouble, that the owner would be upset. And then he said, I know that you can understand me, and since you can, would you please tell my owner that I don't need any more training? And when I conveyed that message to her, she was shocked. She said, how can you know we're talking about sending Titan back to training? And that was the beginning for me of the realization that this capacity, perhaps we would call it a gift, had emerged.
What's interesting, because as you describe that in the book, you're laughing, fell in the water, you get up, shake yourself off, and the horse is like embarrassed, like, I can do better than this. And basically, as you say, communicating, I'm really sorry, this is not going to happen again. Yeah, and I don't need to go for more training. This was just, it's not going to happen again. It happened once and it won't happen again.
Yeah. He was pretty worried. He was pretty upset. He was, he felt that he'd failed, that his job was simple enough to carry people on trail rides, and that he had failed me, but also failed his owner. So it turns out I spoke more with him about it once I realized he had lots to say. And it turns out that, they had seen Titan as wandering away and eating, and that he needed to be sort of reined in again, and that he was just simply asking to be understood. After that meeting with Titan, the owner asked me if I could help with some other horses, and I didn't know what was possible, but ultimately what I was able to learn really helped me as a person, not just to understand horses and who they are, and also to understand the nature of their relationship with humans, but really to understand more about myself. Horses have an incredible way of reflecting back to us what we put out to the world and to them.
Well, it's interesting because at this time in your life, you'd gone through some setbacks throughout the life. Had just gone through a divorce. One of the reasons you went to Costa Rica was to pull yourself together. And you mentioned, working on writing while you're down there. And you talk about this was really a transformation for you. The horses really emotionally helped you through this period and understand yourself and go forward.
That's right. I'm very grateful. And I became conscious of things that I was not fully conscious of, like my belief that I could control things. And in fact, I think I'd spent a lot of my life believing that I could manage and control. I had jobs, managerial leadership jobs, but also just in my personality, in my family life, in my community, feeling like there were high expectations for me to succeed, but also a sense that I could control life so that outcomes would always be good. And with tragedies like the death of an infant child and the sickness of a young adult son and the end of a 30-year marriage, I had to face that you don't always control things in life. You, at some point, have to let go. I had not let go, and I had not really healed myself around those losses until I spent time on a trek with a horse named Conan, who really did teach me about that. And I'm so grateful because I feel relieved. I feel much more accepting of the nature of life and the fact that sometimes we simply have to let go and trust.
In the book, When the Horses Whisper, you talk about your sense of responsibility, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. Oftentimes that comes with a price, and it did in your case, and the horses were able to help you through this and make some sense of everything.
Absolutely. I feel in many ways like a renewed person. I have a greater sense of peace and a greater sense of trusting others to be there to support and help me, and less so that I have to take care of everything myself. I attribute that very much to my experience with the horses, what they said, what they showed me, and how they showed me myself in our experience on these various treks and rides.
I'm sure there are people listening that are going, how do you communicate with a horse? How does that happen? And Dr. Rosalyn Berne is our guest on the program, author of the book, When the Horses Whisper. The book is available all across the country. Information at her website, whenthehorseswhisper.com. Of course, go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get that information. I think you refer to the capacity to communicate with the horses as sort of clairaudience. Explain how that, you're not actually talking in English back and forth to horses. Explain how all of that happens, and you've got a great sort of analogy in there. We often feel like, or people we know feel like they got a message from God, like they are communicating with God, and that's sort of what we're talking about, isn't it? In your case, in communicating with the horses.
And actually, since we're going to use that analogy of prayer, we have to learn to trust what we hear. There's the biblical expression of the still small voice. And it's very much similar. It's still and small, meaning you barely know it's there. You can barely perceive it, and you have to be in a state of ready openness and trust, but really a state of peace and quiet, and not judging yourself and not having any expectations. I think the moment I fell off the horse into the river, I had to let go. I had to completely let go. And so in standing up, I was in a state of readiness. Of course, it's not English, but I translate it back into English, into my own language. So what I get from them, I'm referring to as pre-linguistic. Somehow I'm able to go to the place where meaning is formed, but before words, before language is then ascribed to that meaning, and I can pick it up and translate it very specifically. I can hear very specific words, and I know exactly what their English words are. So, or very specific meanings, and I know what their English words
Right.
are. Hmm.
The book is called When the Horses Whisper. It's available, as I say, all across the country. Fascinating book. Information at the website, whenthehorseswhisper.com. Dr. Rosalyn Berne with us on the program, rapidly running out of time, but I would like to talk about other animals. People are probably thinking, boy, if you can communicate that with horses, are there other animals that you can have this type of communication with?
Well, my understanding is that there are all kinds of animal communicators out there in the world, dogs and others. Personally, since this has happened to me, I think something has opened in me. I'm not hearing other animals in the same way I hear horses so specifically, but I have noted that dogs are coming up to me. And I never used to be a dog person either, but dogs are coming up to me, and I'm aware that they're reaching for me. And I'm not yet in a place where I can translate, but the sense of our connections, of our interconnectedness across species, that we are all somehow here together, and that there's a lot of potential for us in our relationships if we move to a very open place of hearing and feeling and sensing the animals in our lives.
The book is When the Horses Whisper. Great pictures in the book, taken, I understand, by your daughter. Very talented,
Yes, she's a
very talented.
photographer.
The book is available all across the country and, of course, Amazon bookstores across the country. You can get more information at whenthehorseswhisper.com. A couple minutes left in the program. Your day job is teaching, a university professor of science, technology studies. How does that sort of balance out with the communication with horses and what you've been able to learn from them? And
Yeah,
any connection between the two?
I'm looking and I'm really trying to figure out, is this just two separate worlds? But in a way, it's not, because I look at technology and I teach about the role of technology in our lives and what it's doing in change in society. And one of my concerns is that we may be disconnecting from our bodies as we rely more and more and more on these devices. What I'm learning from the horses is that I have to actually become much, much more conscious of my embodiment as a human, as a being, and that allows me to feel and sense and connect with them. And so I think the only clear sense I have right now is that there's a link between the potential loss of our humanity, the potential loss of a sense of awareness, of connection to one another, supplanted and replaced by technology, that we want to be very, very careful to keep that balance, because ultimately we are not technology. We need to remember who we are as we move more rapidly into this new technological world. That's where I see the connection.
It's interesting. Are there voices in the universe that we're missing, that we're just, we're caught up in technology. We go 110 miles an hour day after day. Are there voices out there that we're not really tapping into, but you've learned how to do that in the case, obviously, with horses?
Well, let's start with our own voices and our inability to really, or unwillingness to really listen to, really sense and be present for other people. Let's just start there. And then if you going to go out from there, sure, I've had experiences where I sense the presence of others that we don't necessarily see. Maybe there's some wisdom available for us. And so, absolutely, I want to try to be open to that possibility.
What can people do if they want to tap into this? Let's say yes, I'm close to horses or dogs or whatever. What can they do? I don't imagine it's something that's forced. It probably has to be natural. It took you a while to get to the state where you fully understood what was happening. What can they do to maybe facilitate that process?
I think to quiet the mind and to be very present minded, which is a mindfulness attitude of really just letting go and sinking into the present moment and then removing all judgment and all expectation and simply opening and saying to that animal, I'm listening, and then trust what you hear.
We've got about 30 seconds left in the program. What has this experience meant for you? As I'm reading this, my impression is it really allowed you to reconnect with who you are, with your soul, with your reason for being. Am I overstating that, or is that pretty much what has happened to you?
I think I'm on that path in general in my life. This has reinforced and supported that quest. I certainly do feel like I'm more reconnected with my soul than ever before. I do have other practices, a daily meditation and prayer practice that help that, but I think that this horse connection is part of that and comes out of that.
What happens when students are aware of who you are, what you've done, when you've written the book? Sometimes students, especially maybe in science technology, it's like, okay, I need a cause and effect type of thing. Are they open? Do they understand what you're saying? And maybe you're opening all new doors for these kids.
I have not shared this with my students yet. People who are my age, who are a little put off or confused, what I do is I just start imitating the sound of the show from the 60s, Wilbur.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Good old Mr. Ed.
And they get it, and we use the humor, and then they warm up, and we can talk about it. I'm not quite sure yet how I'm going to approach my students, but before long, I'll share it with them. I hope it will touch their hearts and open them to the possibility that there's more than meets the eye, and maybe one day we'll have the engineering technology to sense these things. We're not there yet, but maybe we'll get there.
I knew we couldn't get through the program without a Mr. Ed reference. Thank you for bringing that up. I was hesitating to do that, but that's the first thought when you talk to people, and that's not what we're talking about on the program. When the Horses Whisper, it's an excellent book. The website is whenthehorseswhisper.com. Dr. Rosalyn Berne has been our guest on the program. We'd love to have you back. I know you're working on more books and just talking about the ethics out there with science technology that we just briefly touched on would be a fascinating topic as well. Congratulations on an excellent book, opening up some new possibilities for all of us out there. Thank you for joining us on the show.
You've been a wonderful host. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you. You're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.